Okay, so now we're going to take a few minutes here, and I'm going to say to you to do one more exercise. Okay, I want you to pick two infrastructure systems. So you might pick school and transportation, stormwater management and housing, or health and transportation. And I want you to sit down and think about what are the primary social problems in the intersection of these two infrastructure. What happens inside of these two infrastructure? And then the next question, and I'll give you the full 5 minutes on this. What information is missing to make a good policy decision across both infrastructure? And then finally, the last one is, can you think of ways in which you could crowdsource that data? So I'll give everybody the full 5 minutes on this one. This one's important because we're going to come back and really think about it. If you have a question, just flick on your mic and ask me.
Prof, just out of my curiosity, have you been to Jakarta?
I have been to Jakarta. I got caught in a flood in Jakarta.
Oh my God.
I came during the rainy season and I was up having dinner with a friend, and my friend looked out the window and she said, "You need to go to the airport right now." And the flight out of Jakarta was very late to get back to the States. And as we were leaving, the streets were filling with water. It was exciting. But I don't live there, so it was exciting. But yeah, I actually really liked Jakarta.
I hope you come back with a better situation then.
Oh, I loved it. It was so exciting. It was just, it was really different. And I really loved wandering around some of the city. Where the old neighborhoods used to be, I wandered around a lot.
Prof. Niemeyer?
Yes.
Aditya here from Transjakarta. Just would like to discuss about the health transport infrastructures with you.
Okay.
Right. I think one of the social problems in the detection of these two infrastructures for me actually is the government decisions makings, how to improve the last mile connectivity in the urban area related to the health and transport, because we don't have any tools to measure the health benefits arising.
I lost you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
All right, because I can see that actually the city government of the Jakarta, they don't have any tools to measure the health benefits came from the walking and cycling benefits, something like that. So if, let's say, they make programs to improve the last mile, to provide the mode choice to improve their last mile connectivities, at the moment, they don't have any measure to calculate the health benefits. So it's kind of the different perspective from the developed countries, like, say, for example, like in New Zealand. In New Zealand, once the government, let's say, they would like to build walking and cycling facilities, they will do the transport modeling, of course, and they will measure the user benefits came from the walking and cycling infrastructures. And from that, they came up with the benefit cost analysis, whether is it kind of the makes sense of the infrastructure they provided, in how about the demand for the features, etc. So unfortunately, in Jakarta at the moment, they don't have any kind of tools to support the policymakers to build such a walking and cycling infrastructure. So that's all my point.
I think you've tapped into a very important part. Okay, you've got a transport and you've got a health issue, and what you're trying to do is figure out if the health issue, if transportation is part of the health issue. Do you know for sure that there's a health issue for bike and walk? Like I could imagine there's bike safety issues or motorcycle safety, pedestrian safety, right?
Yes. In addition to actually, we also need to measure like currently the health systems is partially funded by the government. So
Right.
by providing such kind of the active mode transport, we expect to see in the next like couple of years what type of the reduction of the health costs to the society.
Yeah, yeah. So I will tell you, I was in a country in Africa. It was a big city. They had no infrastructure at all, and they had a lot of safety issues. And so they knew they were spending money on safety issues. You know, people get hit, they go to the hospital, and what we did was we set up people to observe at many intersections. These were community members in neighborhoods and keep track of accidents. And we also set up a monitor at the hospital to catalog accidents. And from that, we were able to estimate the savings for certain kinds of infrastructure improvements. Yeah. I think it's very easy. I personally feel like it's very easy to get trapped into the feeling that you can't make changes because you don't have the latest model, or you don't have, you know, the highest and best technology that the world has to offer. And I think that is a mistake. I think there are ways to make improvements by being creative about how you get the data, how you do your sampling, where you choose to put monitors, how you engage neighborhoods and other people. I was in Kathmandu a few years ago, and one of the questions was, how do we improve pedestrian safety? And we were able to set up a small project in a small area of the city in which we counted the number of people walking and how many went into the street. And then we kind of had a way of correlating it with the number of injuries to pedestrians. Right. Yeah, I think there's lots of ways to do this.
Yes, so what do I mean is actually, if let's say we have the proper transport model, so at least we can testing in terms of the mode choice or the user behavior. If let's say we can do the step preference survey, etc., and from that actually we can testing in the model.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, actually we have the same backgrounds. I'm a transport modeler as well.
Yeah, I can hear it. It's clear to me you are.
Yeah, and I did the transport model in Auckland last year.
Oh, that's great.
Ago.
Yeah.
So I work for the Auckland Transport Project with them to support the growth of Auckland in the next 2 years.
Yeah. Well, then you can think of some really creative ways to get at this. I mean, I think the U.S. is way too dependent on transportation models. Yeah, on just the models. The models, you don't need the models the way we use them. It's silly.
Right.
So
yeah.
Okay, so we're to the point now. Yeah, thank you. We're to the point now that I'm going to move on. So I'm hoping everybody has got their local infrastructure picked out and stuff. So let's go to the next one. Remember I asked you at the beginning, what's a modern city? Now I want you to go back to that, and I want you to say, okay, compare your list to my list of a modern city, right? I think one of the important things about a modern city is co-creation. In other words, that the people in the city are co-creating the city they want. I think grassroots movements are part of a modern city. Citizen engagement. I think government transparency and accountability is part of a modern city. Policies that cut across infrastructure is part of a modern city. And protection for the most vulnerable is part of a modern city. So now think about how you measured a modern city and compare it to mine. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end about the differences. Some of your early comments, we'll talk about those differences a little bit. Okay, So I want to show you another really great example about, you know, of a modern city that seems like a very odd thing to have done. So Medellin, right, is in Colombia, and it's high in the valley in the Andes. And the way the city is structured, also a very big, mega city, is that many of the city's poorest residents live in the steep hills around the main part of the city in these things that are called comunas, and they're communal living quarters that people have built into the side of the steep slopes. And in the 90s, this part of where I'm going to talk about in Medellin is it was just filled with drug gangs, guerrilla fighters. There's very narrow streets all through the city. And when the violence of the 90s started diminishing and eventually has gone, people started venturing out. And they came up against a different challenge. Remember, they're living up in these steep hills around the city in these shacks that they built into the steep slopes and very narrow roads. And so they couldn't get anywhere. And there was a mayor, Luis Perez, who proposed a solution that was just kind of unbelievable at the time. He decided the best thing to do was have cable cars. And these cable cars would go from the top of where these comunas were all the way down into the heart of the city. And people could hop into a gondola and go to a metro station. And the first metro cable line was opened in 2004, 2005, and a bunch more, opened right after that. And the genius of it was that it actually serves the poor and it brings them into the city, which gives them access to jobs and other opportunities. And before Perez, no one had actually ever done that. And then what happened is people of all classes started using the cars to come up the hill to visit bad neighborhoods. And they became invested in improving the neighborhoods. And what has come out of that in the last decade has been some of the world's most innovative planning. I've never seen anything like it. So they not only connected the poorest neighborhoods to the city proper, giving them access to jobs and opportunity, they also did something different. In addition to this, there was a director of urban projects who was there until the mid 2008 or 2010. And what he did was he decided it was time for beautiful design. And so he worked in the same low-income areas where the cable cars were, and he built these beautiful buildings. He built 5 libraries that are sprinkled throughout the city that all have this beautiful sort of greenery, and they were called library parks. And they were the first public places in these neighborhoods that had ever been safe. And his department went street by street. They planted trees, they replaced crumbling buildings and schools, and they were all woven together. And the communities became more integrated into the city, and the people who lived in the cities became more caring and more invested in the outcome of the poor on the outskirts of the city. So it's a different example, but it's the same idea of trying to link social problems together and then using lots of different techniques to try and solve the social problem. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a fun one that I was part of, that I've been, part of advising in. And this is you'll laugh when you see this. These are matatus. And I want to talk about another way a city becomes market is it takes advantage of its strengths. And sometimes these strengths aren't what you expect them to be. And so in Nairobi, Kenya, nearly everybody gets around in these minibuses. And these minibuses are run by entrepreneurs. The vehicles themselves are called matatus. And they're cheap, they're plentiful. When you're in Nairobi, you see these buses everywhere, and they do very, very loud music, and they have these sparkling disco balls going on them. They're amazing. And here's a picture of a few buses, and they're run by the youth. They are not run by older generations, they're run by the youth. And the youths call them sort of club on wheels or museum on wheels, and they bounce and they weave through traffic. And each matutu is like louder than the one that came before it, or more flashy. And in terms of getting around the city, they're cheap, they're affordable, they're cheap, they're convenient. They're the main choice for transport for almost all the Kenyans who live in Nairobi. And the other thing about it that's kind of interesting is when you see the matutus and you see the art on the buses, you begin to really understand Nairobi, because Nairobi is a city of young people. And so because it's young people, it's very hard to harness them, right? Like they're all individuals and they're working on their own business. And one of the biggest problems was that the matutus run on routes and schedules that are really hard to find. And if you get on the wrong bus or you get on the wrong stop, you can be on the matutus for hours while it runs its routes. So here's the cool part that happened. Basically what happened is a group of researchers and a design firm called Digital Matutus came in, and they hired a bunch of university students to ride all the buses and use a smartphone app to track the routes and the stops. And when Digital Matutus released its subway style map of, like, I think it had more than 100 routes and major stops, and this was just like a couple of years ago, people snatched them up. Women said, this is really valuable because I don't want to get on the wrong matutu where I don't feel safe. But it gets even cooler, because not only did the students create these maps, a few months ago, the Nairobi matutus became the first informal transit system on Google Maps. The first in the world. So these youth hopped in to these buses that were essentially uncontrolled and traveling all over the place, but had worked out routes between themselves and formalized the service. And then Google came in and put the map as the first informal transit map. So this is the informal sector being harnessed to bring into a more orderly way in which people can access it, without breaking down the very essence of the individuality of a city that is run, is just full of youth. So let me go to the last sort of example, the Jakarta BRT. This is a great BRT system. You just won a big award last year for sustainability. It's the longest BRT in the world now. It serves millions. And it's interesting because in the beginning, when I was looking at the BRT, it had some very hard years. In the beginning, it was not clear that it was going to be successful. And so what's important about this is that the service is still low cost, and many of the best features include dedicated bus lanes, off-board fare purchasing that has increased. The efficiency is pretty good. You have specific stops. So there's been a cultural shift from when I first read it and learned about it, where people were used to just getting off anywhere. Now people are more used to getting off at stops. a friend of mine who lives in Jakarta sent me a snapshot of a new mobile app that you can now use to ride it. And so it's turned out to be a really terrific system. What's really interesting here, though, there's a couple of crucial things that come out. One reason it's been so successful is that everyone has full access to its vehicles and its infrastructure. And this means like having both an entrance and a connection to the surrounding area and a stop and at the stop itself. And as Jakarta, oh, I'm so sorry, thank you so much. And as Jakarta grows horizontally, the features that are crucial to it have to grow as well. And that means things like pedestrian bridges, elevator facilities, sidewalks, all these things have to grow as well in order for the BRT to remain successful. And that's harder if cities grow horizontally. It costs a lot more money to do that kind of infrastructure development. Okay, so now I'm going to push you a little bit by having you sort of think about, again, what is a modern city? And now I'm going to be a little bit more clear. I'm going to say that a modern city has a whole systems of infrastructure, and that I'm going to keep coming back to this. Solving a problem in a single infrastructure is not going to be the best way to go about it. I'm going to say that a modern city has the informal sector can be viewed as a complement, not as a substitute. You look for low-cost solutions that cross multiple problems, and you again work for the ability to identify and protect those most vulnerable. And when you look at the kinds of government policies that intersect with that, what you have to start spending time on are cross-domain metrics, not just health metrics, not just transportation metrics, but metrics that touch on both health and transportation. And again, I come back to this: leverage community engagement, be transparent, engage the informal sector. Okay, now I'm going to give you a slide that will really get you going here, okay? So I'm going to tell you, if you're willing to agree with my idea of a modern city, that what you can do is actually map out the different infrastructure of a city. And you can think of a modern city as a whole bunch of systems, and you can look at how the different domains are connected to one another. And you can then think about the kinds of policies that are being implemented. Now you see these red dots here. I'm using them to show you an example. The red dots in the middle of nowhere, like the one up there where power and electricity is, the red dots in the middle of nowhere are red tape. They're red tape. They're hurdles that are in the regulations that you should review. The red dots, where there's 2 or 3 different red dots, those are red tape. Those are policies around each infrastructure that could be combined and cut down on red tape. And the single red dots at intersections, these intersections, force you to think about policies that solve more than one problem. So in other words, you don't get to improve transportation or expand transportation unless you think how it connects to the internet, how it connects to health services, how it connects to housing. It forces you each time to think about the connections between the different systems of how things work in a city. And to give you an example, I'm going to give you the results of a recent study that was done on COVID in Indonesia. And you have this study in your materials, and it's very interesting. So, and to do that, we're going to look at just this little sector right here, okay? This one that you can see with this housing health services one. Okay, so the pandemic and poor women. Let's take let's take what's happening. So the pandemic has affected vulnerable communities globally. There's no question about it. And poor women are affected, have been affected much more severely than poor men. In Indonesia, women carry the burden of unpaid work. That's been clearly demonstrated in many, and it's true in many countries, but it's been demonstrated in Indonesia that they carry the burden of unpaid work. It's through caregiving and some gender inequality and segregation in the labor market. Okay, this burden has multiplied in the pandemic. There's also limits to healthcare services and education that has made things worse. Even though men are more likely to die of the disease once they have the disease, these pre-existing gender inequalities put women at a higher risk of coronavirus. And this is because fewer women own vehicles in Indonesia. So they're traveling in transportation facilities. These informal workers, who are largely women, are traveling by transit. And then they have lower access to health facilities. So then what happens when the schools closed? Now women also have this extra burden of children because of the school closure. And so when the schools closed down for COVID-19, it disproportionately affected women globally. In the US, it's been very clear women quit their jobs to stay home with kids, to work with kids. And poor women are much more likely to also be caretakers of the children in the household. And so what happened in Indonesia is that according to this paper, which is also in your packet, what they did was the government set up the National Economic Recovery Program, and it has a social assistance fund allocation for the poor. And when they analyzed the data, what they found out is that the number of men who received the social assistance was much higher than the number of women who received it. And so what that meant is that poor women who were head of households were actually not taking advantage of the social assistance fund. And when they dug into it a little bit deeper, what they found out was that there was basically a complicated disbursement policy that had a very long application process and required approval levels at the local level. And so the point of this is not, it could have been done better, because I think every country is learning from this episode. The point is that by understanding who's vulnerable, who's the most vulnerable, you can actually better target programs when you need them. You can better target infrastructure that already exist in communities, rather than trying to do it from on high. So that's the point of this example, is that in fact, there are ways to fine tune and refine policy if you know more about who you're protecting. Okay, or that health or transportation policy, pick one or the other, and ask, what are the infrastructure improvements it has relevance to, and who's vulnerable. So now I'm asking you to pick a policy you know about and say, okay, here's the policy I know, here are the infrastructure parts that it's relevant. We'll take a few minutes to do this. These are good questions in the chat. I'm looking at them all, and you guys are working on things. The reason I have you do these exercises also is because this is what you do in policy making. This is what you do to be a modern city. You work through these details. Okay, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time because this is the first time where I'm going from policy to infrastructure to vulnerable population. And I only have 2 more slides and we'll go through and be finished up. But keep this one. This is an important one for when you want to think about how to make government more efficient. This is the key slide here. All right, so we only have a couple more slides and I'm going to do them really fast because you got a lot on resilience yesterday. I looked through the slides and so I think it will be very helpful just as a brush in real quick. So if you think about cities as systems, then you think about resilience. And I want you to remember that resilience and vulnerability are not the same. And risk and resilience are not the same. People often confuse that. They say we want to be less vulnerable, but that's not the same as being resilient. You can't always reduce all vulnerability, but what you can do is create infrastructure, create cities that actually help you recover from things that you can't control, recover from disasters, for example. So in order to get to resilience, it's an outcome that depends on a very good process. So if you have the process of creating and thinking about cities as systems and thinking about who wins and who loses and thinking about how to protect the most vulnerable in society, if that's your process, you end up with a resilient city. So that's what I want you to remember when you look through all those slides on resilience and you think about them. Think about the process. The process is if the process is good, you'll be resilient. If the process is a top-down process, if you don't engage citizens, if you don't work with communities, if you don't think about who's most vulnerable, then at the end of the day, your city will not be resilient. It just won't be. Okay, one more slide and then we'll call it a day. Okay, here are some of the dimensions. I know that you got some dimensions yesterday, but I just want you to also just take a quick look at these dimensions. And they're ones I refer to a lot when I'm thinking about resilience and how to promote resilience. I think a lot about just some additional metrics that you can use. Okay, this is my last slide, the last 5 minutes, okay? And all I want you to do here is that problem you identified earlier in the intersection of 2 infrastructure where we were talking about transport and health. Now I want you to ask yourself, what are the dimensions of resilience that apply to this problem? And how do they intersect with the infrastructure? So what are the dimensions based on what you learned last night that apply to the intersection and the problems of the 2 infrastructure? And then I want you to think about what are the metrics you could use to improve something? What are the metrics you could use to know if what you're doing will actually improve things? And we'll do this for like 2 minutes and then we'll open it up for the questions and I'll quit talking. Okay, one more minute and then we'll open it up for questions. You guys are probably tired of me talking at you too, so. Okay, so you have the slides. You can keep working on these, but I'll wrap it up because I know I'm supposed to be able to answer questions for a little bit of time. So I'm gonna go to this one, say thank you, and then I'll go to the big screen and stop sharing. Okay. How should we do the questions? Is somebody talking?
The moderator, can you hear the voice?
I can hear you now, yes.
No, I'll refer back to the moderator. Miss
okay.
Tricia, can you, sorry.
Hello, Mas Fajar. Yes, sorry, my internet just went down and I was just being logged in just now. So thank you so much, Dr. Niemeyer. And now, without ado, in the interest of time, I'm just gonna start the Q&A. We have about 30 minutes right now, and we will end around 11. So I will start with the first question, if that's okay with you.
Totally.
All right. So, Dr. Niemeyer, the first question is from Miss Silvani Dianita, and the institution that...
I think I lost her.
We're still here, Professor Meyer, but I do believe you lost her.
Hello? Okay.
Am I reconnected?
Hello? Yeah, you're back.
Okay, I'm back, sorry. The internet is unstable. So let me restart that. The first question is from Miss Silvani Dianita, and the organization that she is representing is the Minister of Home Affairs from the Human Resources Development Board. So the question is very insightful. It is this: developing countries, including Indonesia, have made enormous investment in the construction of transportation infrastructure. It has enhanced mobility and contributed positively to economic development through efficient movement of goods and people between and among rural and urban areas in developing countries. So her question is, A, how long will transportation infrastructure continue to contribute to economic growth in developing countries? And then B, will this still remain true when the economy mature? Yes. Should I repeat the question, or is
no? I think this is a very good question, right? So I think there's two parts to the question, as I understand it. The first part is, you know, how much has it contributed to the economy? Am I right? The second part is, how long will it contribute? Oh, I think I lost the moderator. Is that right?
I think you got it right, Professor.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, I'm sorry?
So, Professor, this is Miss Silvani. I put it in the spotlight as well. Maybe Miss Silvani, you want to add something?
No. Yeah.
No, I think the moderator has been done the question by
okay, so the first part of the question was what? Can you repeat it?
Yes, the first part of the question is, how long will transportation infrastructure continue to contribute to economic growth in developing countries? That's A. And is this still true when the economy matures?
Yeah, so I think how long will it contribute? I think efficient transportation always contributes forever, right? If you have efficient transportation, you're always going to be, you're always going to get a contribution to the economy. I don't think there's any question. The problem is that what happens when transportation is no longer efficient, when congestion is so high that you can no longer make those urban-rural connections that you're making now. You cannot even make across-city connections very easily. At that point, is transportation adding to or taking away from your economic prosperity? If you look at congestion losses, you will find out that in fact it probably is taking away from your economic prosperity. It's not giving it to you at that point. So I think it all depends on the degree of congestion that you face in the short term. In the long term, it depends on your ability to maintain that system and to expand it as necessary. In the US, we have a fabulous system that we can no longer afford to maintain. So at some point, the cost of maintaining that system will exceed our ability to pay for it in certain areas that will be critical for our economic prosperity. So your question is a really good one. And I think, you know, as I understand Jakarta's traffic these days, I think it's probably, I think I saw a stat maybe a month ago that it was the 6th or 7th worst worst traffic in the world. And if that's true, then transportation becomes your bind. It doesn't become it becomes a bind to prosperity. It doesn't add to prosperity. But if you expand it endlessly, then you're where the US is, where it costs a lot of money to maintain it. So there's this tension that exists in that question that you captured very well.
Thank you, Dr. Niemeyer. So, Ms. Silvani, is there anything else to add? If not, I'm going to proceed to the second question.
Yeah, I have one last question is about what is the impact for healthy living for urban population?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The impact for healthy living for urban population.
The impact of what?
This infrastructure developing for healthy living for urban population.
So you mean, what is the impact of transportation for the urban population?
Yeah.
For health, from a health perspective.
Health perspective.
Yeah. So I do a lot of work in air quality, and from a health perspective, transportation's a big problem in heavily congested cities. And if you look at safety stats, if you look at pedestrian accidents, if you look at so take the big category of safety and the big category of environmental externalities, transportations can be a drag on the economy. So those are two very important aspects of externalities to transportation that are not fully built into how we view it, and they're not good. There's no positive from those two externalities.
Thank you, Dr. Niemeyer. So thank you, Mbak Silvani. Let me proceed to the second question. And the question is from Mr. Denny Jati. He is a part of the West Jakarta administrative body. So the question is, the plan to relocate the capital city of Indonesia, which is DKI Jakarta, will make urbanization to the island of Kalimantan, so that perhaps the population density in Jakarta would be reduced. The question is, will the smart city that is currently being built in Jakarta, the efforts to build a smart city in Jakarta, be affected by a new smart city capital in the future? So perhaps how do we maintain such synchronicity and parallel between two smart cities being built and as the epicenter of Indonesia, perhaps? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I
Yes,
know.
I would reckon. Yeah, it is.
I know there's the new capital is being discussed. But to be honest, I really don't know enough
No
about.
worries. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. I
I think,
it's a very good and important question.
yes, correct. So thank you so much. And Mr. Denny, I think this the answer would be predictive answers. And let's just hold on for the next few years. We'll invite Dr. Niemeyer again, and she would have a lot to say. All right. So let's proceed to this third
Thank you, Professor.
Yes. Let me proceed to the third question from Ibu Yuli, Miss Yuli. She is, again, like Ibu Silvani from the Human Resources Development Board, Ministry of Home Affairs. So the question is, in Jakarta and in other cities in Indonesia, the development of modern cities always go hand in hand with an increase in the crime rate of the city. And I think this also holds true in America, in a lot of the cities in America. So the question from Ms. Yuli is, what is the strategy to handle this? Do we prioritize things first to handle the crime? Or do we prioritize first things first to handle the urban development?
Well, so I will tell you that some of the research in this area shows that crime goes down when prosperity is more evenly distributed. So I think this is such a great question because it allows me to show you how, you can address one by addressing the other. They're combined. When you're able to grow in a way that everyone benefits to some degree, it's been shown over and over that crime tends to go down.
Yeah, agree. Ibu Yuli, is there anything else to add? Okay. If not, let me proceed to the fourth question from Transjakarta, Bapak Ari Mufti. So this is quite difficult as well. It's about digital coverage. Yes, I know, right?
Probably very hard question.
Yeah, this feels like an exam. All right, let me try. So Jakarta is the front runner in the national digital infrastructure availability. With a 4G blanket coverage, the highest device ownership, as well as the presence of banking, telco, and digital sectors in our economy, Jakarta also have a younger demography, or what we call the digital natives.
Yeah.
Like me, maybe. Okay, next. Still, we see lagging digital usability in the public sector. The scale of digital adoption is still focusing on front-end areas. So the question is, how do we accelerate transformation? How do we incentivize smarter usage of such digital infrastructure availability in public policy? And what will be the optimum role of the public sector?
Okay, so this is a hard question and I can't answer it for Jakarta, but what I can do is do an example in Kathmandu. So Kathmandu also has a very large youth, and by youth in Nepal, youth is anyone below the age of 42.
Yeah.
So a very large group of digital savvy youth who have been trained really well in the digital world. And what's happening there is they're stepping into areas in which the public sector would normally do. So they're coming up with ideas. For example, there was a guy who was trained at the University of Illinois, went back to Nepal and realized that they needed a digital system, a market board, if you will, for advertising agriculture prices before it hit the farmers market in Kathmandu.
Okay.
So he completely set up this board. He taught farmers how to dial in how much of whatever produce they were going to bring to market. He was able to essentially set up a market system digitally that linked farmers to farmers markets. And I think to some degree that's what's going to happen. You're going to have this high level digital world that exists, and then everybody else underneath. And the people who are going to bridge this are going to be the young people. They're going to see the needs in different ways, and they're going to be the ones who are going to innovate and connect the dots.
Got it. So, Pak Ari, ada lagi pertanyaannya, Pak? I think it was very clear to me. Do you have any other questions?
Yes, I think it's quite clear. But regarding the actual condition in Jakarta, which have huge potentials, I feel frustrated about how we approach these potentials, since the government or even the local government have to catch up by investing huge numbers of solutions on top of this infrastructure availability. I believe that we need to come up with some kind of mainstreaming views, in a sense of implementing digitals in as many as possible problem available, which is quite daunting for us to realize.
It's the same way in the US. I mean, I think government is so far behind the private sector here. And they're so far behind in terms of understanding privacy rights. They're so far behind in terms of making records available, of cataloging data, all kinds of things. I feel your frustration. It is very hard when that lag is happening.
I think we should discuss about this later in the group discussion, and we can address this issue further. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Ari. Thank you, Professor. So our last two questions. The fifth question is from Pak Zuhud from the Regional Cooperation Bureau under the Provincial City of Jakarta. So the question is how to create a deep and long-term culture of participation and engagement in urban issues, especially to fight, or maybe let me rephrase that, to balance the dominance or the prevalence of a more pragmatic, more business-oriented solution.
I think this is the heart of a modern city right here. This question captures it. If all that ever happens is that one side, the business side, let's say, comes in to solve problems, then nobody is invested in the city itself. It's only a transaction. It's a transaction, for money, for whatever, but it's a transaction. It's not me saying, I love my neighborhood. I love this city. I love this country. I think that how to create that sort of deep culture of participating in solving problems, that is the heart of the modern city. And I think the way I've seen it most successfully done globally is small pockets that actually result in change. That seems to ignite fires in people about the potential for change. So you need small successes that engage people and communities and work from that forward. But that's a great question, just a great question.
Thank you. Pak Zuhud, do you have anything else to ask to Dr. Niemeyer, or should I proceed? Everything good? Okay. So in the interest of time, we have two more questions, but this could also be our last question if the time doesn't permit, depending on the answer and follow-up questions. So from Pak Bramastra from Saranajaya, which is a regional business entity owned by DKI Jakarta. So the question is on gentrification. So if we unlock the potential of the underdeveloped area within a city, that could lead to an opening of a new potential space for work, recreation, and also helping the people in the underdeveloped area to thrive more. But on the other hand, this undeniably could also lead to gentrification. So the question is, how do we balance the effects between unlocking the potential of the underdeveloped space in the city, but with the potential of gentrification that could also remove the poor people from the area that we would like to improve in the first place?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So, so of what city I've seen in cities over the last 10 years. Yeah. It used to be you just went out and you developed and you didn't worry about this stuff.
Yeah.
I think now what cities are realizing is when you do that, it pushes people out and you get to this horizontal expansion problem. And so what I've seen now cities introducing rules in which when you develop these places, there's affordable housing for people to stay. And if you have an affordable housing problem already in the city, this kind of thing is very hard to do without making more affordable housing somewhere. And so cities are requiring developers to, okay, you can create this part of this open field or underdeveloped area, but you must also rehab this area so that there is affordable housing that matches gentrification.
Right.
So strategies like that I've seen a lot deployed in recent years, especially in the last 10 years.
Correct. Pak Bramastra, is there anything to add? Because I think the next question from Ms. Ika also pertains to something like that.
I think I would like to add, regarding that solution, that means the government really needs to create a policy that really needs to, help the poor people to get the same, same opportunity as like a big developers to to retain their space, retain their place, and to also have their say within the planning processes. Is that a correct solution as well?
Yes.
Yes. Mayor.
Yes, and I mean in places where this has been really successful, the community has been part of the discussion, and sometimes members of the community have elected to leave and go to other places. Sometimes developers are able to integrate low-cost housing with other housing so that people don't have to leave. And so I do think there has to be a process of engagement and a process of discussion. If you want your city to grow more vertically than horizontally, and that's where efficiencies are. So yes.
Right. So
that's all.
Thank you, Pak Bramastra. So the last question is actually very salient to that. It is about horizontal versus vertical growing of the city. As you said, a city should grow upward and not outward. So the question is from Ibu Ika, Ms. Ika, from the Communication Information and Statistic Agency within the DKI Jakarta provincial government. So the question is, with regard to the land scarcity in Jakarta, she doubts that Jakarta would go into a comprehensively or a completely horizontally growing city. So could there be more things that could go wrong with this transportation system, even if a city already grow vertically?
Well, I mean,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's scales, right? Some cities have more room to grow vertically in a sense. They can expand here and grow vertically, but they can also expand here and grow vertically. But in general, transportation gets better when you grow vertically. Things are easier to get to. Congestion seems to be less because more people walk or bike. I mean, the cities just are more efficient in all kinds of ways.
Right. Maika, are there other nuances or layers to your question that you would like to ask? We still have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Patricia. Thank you, Professor. I just want to note that it is very delightful to hear a lecture from you, because from what I see, that I think, Patricia, we're in a good path. We're in the right path, Jakarta. That is because we are, more than ever collaborating with everyone in the city to build the city, and then not just for the transportations, but the overall development which was what Professor has been highlighting, I think, in this course tonight. The leverage citizen participations and then co-creating to find solutions. That is what I'm saying, that we are on the right path. And then thank you, Professor, for highlighting that. I think that's a big highlight for us tonight. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to tell me that. I'm glad that's the way you're sort of going across about the process. That's terrific.
Thank you, Dr. Niemeyer. Thank you, Maika, for the response. So I think in the interest of time, we should wrap up the Q&A, Professor. We still have, I believe, a few questions remaining. But we have to move on to the breakout room, I think, for a more comprehensive one-on-one between mentors and mentee sessions that we would have after this. So thank you again, Dr. Niemeyer, for the very comprehensive and insightful lessons learned, not only from America, but from all over the world, which is very relevant to the context of Jakarta as an ever-growing, modern, globally connected, and hopefully sustainable city. So I think that's all from me. Thank you so much. Do you have any last notes to impart to us?
I just really enjoyed, I've been looking at the questions in the chat room. They're super good. And
yes,
I'm just so pleased and honored to have been here tonight. And I also will tell you, if you want to talk more, just let the Maryland team know. I'll come back. I don't mind. Just try not to be 1 in the morning. But if, but I'm happy to come back and chat. So
I believe it's already 11 p.m. there in Maryland. So thank you so much for your time. It's an honor for all of us.
Patricia.
And thank you for So I think
Oh, Patricia, Professor, do you have any like Twitters or Instagram emails that maybe we can respond directly to you if we have any more questions or want to discuss anything with you?
I have my email, which I think you guys already have. You are more than welcome to send me an email. I actually read my emails and I will respond to you. So, feel free always. That's terrific. I would love to hear.
Thank you, Professor.
So thank you again, Professor Niemeyer. So that's all from me. Thank you as well for all the organizers and all the participants and mentors. So Mas Fajar, I'm handing it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much for Professor Dip Niemeyer. I learned a lot myself, even myself. So I learned a lot, and thank you so much. And I believe all of other participants are also learning a lot from today's sessions. And yes, we have the email contact for Professor Dip Niemeyer. If any participant would like to contact more, the organizing committee can share it with you. So I think it's also a wrap for the keynote sessions for the program. This is the 3rd day. So we will come back, I think, within 2 weeks before the closing ceremony and also the presentations, everything. And the participant now will be more engaging with the group discussions and group project. And thank you so much, Professor, again.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you also
Thank you for all the great questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much also for other colleagues from University of Maryland, Professor Thomas Hillard. I believe he's here as well. Ms. Aisha. The organizing committee will keep in touch with the colleagues from University of Maryland throughout the program. Thank you so much and have a good night. I believe
Thank
it's
you.
already there.
And you have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.